does it feel like night today? Something in here is not right today. Why am I so uptight today? A new episode of Columbia House Party is all I got left. Jake, what's up, man?
Not much. Feeling uptight and whatever the other rhyming word was.
Yeah, so something in here is not right today. Why am I so uptight today? Come on.
Feeling not right and uptight.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not
that's
actually.
a good
I feel
tagline for the podcast. Yeah, we've had a few of these opening lyrics over the course of the podcast that fit the podcast really well. And something's not right, so uptight is that one works too, man.
It does speak to our, I don't know, existences, I guess.
Uptightness and not rightness.
I was gonna say sensibilities, but I don't know if that's right.
I don't think that's right.
I don't
think
know where I'm
uptight
going
is a
with
sensibility.
this. We're filling time.
Well, thank God we have a guest today, because you're
seriously
not on your game out of the gate here, Jake.
I know.
This was really fun. I had so much fun this week going back and listening to this band in prep for this one. And I know that a lot of what we're going to talk about today is not the fun elements of this band. There's a lot to sort through and a lot of heaviness with it. But I don't think I expected it to hold up as well as it does. It's just like it still rips and I still really, really enjoy it. The connection here is really just that today's guest wrote such a great piece on this album that I was just like, wanting to get this episode in. And finally I was like, we're just doing it. So today, Jake, we're talking about one of the most successful and influential bands from the early 2000s nu metal boom, one that blurred the lines between genres, delivered hit after hit, and opened up a door into empathetic, vulnerable lyricism in an arena that had rarely welcomed it. Today, we're talking about Linkin Park and their 2000 debut, Hybrid Theory.
Why am I so uptight today? Paranoia is all I got left. I don't know what stressed me first and how the pressure was fed, but I know just what it feels like to have a voice in the back of my head, like a face that I hold inside, face that awakes when I close my eyes, face that I watch every time I lie, face that laughs every time I fall. Everything. So I know that when it's time to sink or swim, the face inside is hearing me right underneath my skin. It's like a paranoid looking over my back. It's like a whirlwind inside of my head. It's like I can't stop what I'm hearing within. It's like the face inside is right beneath the skin. It's like I'm paranoid looking over my back. It's like a whirlwind inside of my head. It's like I can't stop what I'm hearing within. It's like the face inside is right beneath my skin.
That was Paper Cut, the lead track off of Hybrid Theory and the fourth single. And Jake, very, very good, I think, album opener in terms of setting the tone for the band and the album that is to come. Obviously, it was only the fourth single, but pretty killer opener, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll bring this up later, but there's, I think, 3 songs on this album that like 10 seconds of each, like a specific 10 seconds of each gets stuck in my head to this day randomly. And the chorus of that song is one of them.
Yeah. Yes. The 10 seconds that surely get stuck in your head is you walking around with just shut up when I'm talking to you. Shut up in your head. So as I mentioned off the top, the impetus for this episode was not necessarily the usual natural connection, but an excellent article from back in October at BuzzFeed News. Linkin Park were a day one spreadsheet presence of a band that I wanted to talk about, but we were lucky enough to get the author of that article at BuzzFeed News on. We're joined today by Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Elamin, thanks for joining us, man.
Oh my God, my pleasure. I am so excited to do this. Thank you so much for having me.
Guys, if you don't know, Elamin is a culture writer at BuzzFeed News and the host of Party Lines at CBC News and the host of the very excellent Pop Chat podcast at CBC. You can follow him for all his great work at Elamin88 on Twitter. Another fun fact about Elamin before we get into Hybrid Theory, I read in researching for this episode, Elamin, that you're only 5'8".
That's what the internet says. I have. There's a website, and I would like to sue this website for slander. The website is heightzone.com. I don't know where they got random biographical information about me, most of which appears to be correct, except for two pieces of information. One, they say that I'm American. I am not. I'm Canadian. And the second one is I am allegedly 5'8", and boy, like I was like, oh, it's interesting that this is what sets me off. I need to go into my rage cave and listen to some Linkin Park to soothe myself because I am furious.
Yeah, that is, look, as someone, you're on a podcast with a shorter man and also a podcast with someone who's right in that range of, am I lying about my height? Because I'm 5'10", borderline 5'11", and that's always the height where, either you can round up to 6 foot on the dating apps, or you just be honest about it and people assume you're rounding up from like 5'8". So there's a lot of, there's too many sub 6 foot guys on this pod.
You can also be my size and just have no sense of what anything is. Like you guys are like, oh, I'm only 5'10", 5'11". I'm not that tall. I'm like, no, untrue. You are both tall. From my perspective, you are both tall.
But the thing is, I don't claim tallness or shortness for that matter. I just claim my height. Like I'm just like, hey, I am 5'11", and I would like to live as a 5'11" person. And I don't want to say that I'm 6 feet. That is not a thing that I'm interested in. But similarly, like, don't drag my name through the mud like this, or specifically 3 inches lower to the mud. That is not cool.
Yeah, you're not pulling a Fred Van Vliet here, where you're rounding up to 6 feet. When you got your shoes on and stuff. Yeah,
that's not my play. That is not my play.
Yeah. So you also mentioned before we came on that you were wearing a jersey today, and I'm curious as to what jersey you're wearing.
It is a Liverpool jersey. It is a Liverpool.
Uh-oh.
Hey, that's interesting. I've never gotten that response before.
Jake is a Tottenham fan, so.
Oh, what is it like being third or fourth? I don't know. Who even remembers?
I mean, it's better than what it usually is what I'll say.
That's true. Touche. I will say that like I'm Tottenham adjacent in that like I similar to how a lot of people say they have a lot of black friends. I have a lot of Tottenham supporter friends, and so I try not to slander Tottenham too much. But also, it's just fun to do it. It's too easy. I can't lie.
I gotta say, being a fan of both the Maple Leafs and Tottenham and the Blue Jays, and I guess it is kind of like, just take your shots. Like,
those are choices, my dude.
There's nothing I can say. I'm like, no, actually, it's fun being shit all the time.
Yeah, look, it's very much. I know that this meme is overused. The Bane, like I was born in the darkness. I didn't see light. Whatever. Elamin, there's one more connection here I want to mention before we get into the Linkin Park discussion, and I'm hoping that this is more accurate in researching you than the 5'8" fact. We were at Queens at the same time.
We were?
Yeah, I was there 04 to 08, and the internet told me you were there from 05 to 11.
That is entirely correct. Yeah, we did overlap.
Yeah.
I was also, I was there for 6 years, which is a mighty long time to be there.
Yeah, I was there 04. I'm a COM 08, so I was there 04 to 08, and then I was back a bunch in 09 and 2020 or 2010 to like visit friends and stuff. But I went back in the fall of 2019 to like speak on this like panel, and that was the first time I had been back like since then.
Oh wow! See, like so I'm from Kingston. I spent
cool.
Spent my youth there. So I was born in Sudan, but I moved to Canada when I was 12, and from 12 until like I guess 21, 22ish, Kingston was my home. So I go back quite often, and like I don't know, man, I'd love to be dragged as a Queens kid, but also like I'm very proud of it. Like it's both are true.
Yeah, I mean it can be both. Like it's not like I cover sports. It's not like I use my business degree or anything. It's just I happen to have gone to Queens. Elamin, I'm curious. So you moved here from the Sudan when you were 12. Yeah. This is something we can get into a little bit more because obviously Linkin Park was an important band to you not long after that age. But how much was music a part of like that transition for you, whether it was like, connecting with friends or just finding a place here? Like, was that, or was music something more like as you got into your teens, it became a bigger part of your life?
No, honestly, it was pretty immediate. Like for me, I came from Sudan and I didn't really know a lot of English, and I had no friends here. And so like the radio, it was one of the first friends that I made, which is to say that I listened to a lot of Butterfly by Crazy Town. Big song. And also Nelly Furtado's I'm Like a Bird. That was the year that I came. And like music became my way of making a lot of friends. One of my first close friends was someone who listened to a lot of metal. It is not immediately obvious that an immigrant kid from Sudan who lives in Kingston, who doesn't speak much English, would listen to metal as their first genre, but that was because of the friends that I made when I first arrived in this country. So music was very much like the path in. And I would say like the first band that I actually fell in love with was probably Disturbed, also big in that era. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking Blake's language.
Disturbed was like maybe grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, like my favorite band. And I legitimately thought that they were like the best band in the world. Then like, yeah, I liked Linkin Park and Slipknot and Limp Bizkit and stuff like that. But Disturbed was it for me.
Yeah, listen, between, I would say like 99 and 2001, like Disturbed ran the town. Like there's just, I can't remember a band having as much of an impact on me as they did. Not that this is a Disturbed episode, but you know, like there's something about the energy they had and like the vibe that they had that was kind of, you know, it was like you listen to the music, I'm like, I'm a little bit worried about me, but also I really like this.
Yeah, it's good. So let's transition now to Linkin Park, obviously the band we're talking about today, and they're not too far removed from that same kind of moment and you know, rough genre. Like the music doesn't sound the same as Disturbed, but I feel like a lot of bands like that kind of got lumped in together. Mm-hmm. So I mean, you wrote that great piece for BuzzFeed News about the 20th anniversary of Hybrid Theory, and I want to talk about that a little bit more when we get deeper into the album. But I guess just at a higher level, why did you want to come on and do this episode with us? And why is Linkin Park so important to you?
Well, you know, I was thinking a lot about this anniversary of Hybrid Theory, which was in October 2020, 20-year anniversary. And I guess like that number hit me kind of hard because I was trying to remember all the emotions that I was going through that album kind of grounded me in. Emotions of feeling kind of, you know, in a foreign place. Emotions of having fights with my parents, probably about not, you know, being able to go out on a Friday night or whatever. But like but the emotions, even though like the fights were dumb, but the emotions were so real and so like intense because you feel everything so intensely in that period. And I was like, my God, I can't believe that it's been 20 years. And there's something about that album that I think if you go back and listen to now, and you guys were mentioning this about like a song like Paper Cut, like I think part of the reason it sounds so fresh is that like it's just such a good way to immediately plug into those emotions. Like there is no filter. Like when I listen to those songs, I am immediately 12 and 13 again. I'm not, you know, it doesn't like, I actually like, I don't think I can listen to it as an adult. Like, I don't think I'm capable of doing that because when I put it on, I'm like, I'm in that world. And there's something timeless about that because like not every album is like that. You know, there's lots of albums from that period of time that you listen to and you're like, no, that just sounds like a 2001 kind of record. But not this. Like it just like it's something about it that is just so visceral.
Yeah, the thing that for me, this is I guess kind of weird, but it puts you in the time and age. But like, I don't know. I felt like I was back on rollerblades when I went back and listened to this album. It's just like, that's the rough age. All right, we got to take a break. We're going to talk a lot more about Linkin Park and Hybrid Theory after this. All right, Jake, I forgot to ask you before that usual first break what your connections to Linkin Park are. Sorry to leave you out, Jake.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, not as strong as you guys, I think. I own this album because I think everybody of our sort of generation owns this album. I'm kind of unsure in my memory of it. They weren't a band that stuck with me for a long time, but obviously I was very aware of them throughout their existence because they were so huge. I remember I got really, like, very much like I think probably 90% of their demographic. You know, when this came out, I was 11 or 12, I guess. So right in that, like, I'm angry and sad, but I don't know why. So perfect for Linkin Park. And I remember really liking it when it came out. I had heard One Step Closer first, and I was like, that's a cool song. I think maybe the reason that I didn't ever get like super deep into them is because they kind of came out right when I was kind of transitioning out of being into sort of the new metal stuff. And I was more finding my way into like punk and those kind of things. So while I liked this, it was kind of, in giant air quotes, uncool to me almost immediately. And so I think I kind of moved away from it. And I never really went back to it until recently. But like I said, I've had, other than like the inescapable singles on this record that like everybody knows, I've had just like bits and pieces of it swirling in my brain and like not even really being able to identify what songs they are, but like knowing they were Linkin Park. Mm-hmm. And then going back and listening to it being like, oh, that's what that song that I've been kind of singing to myself for 20 years is, which I think speaks to them.
I challenge you to go back and look at press photos of them from the time of this album and come to face with the fact that you clearly had no idea what cool looked like or was, because these guys had it.
I will say, I think a reason I didn't go back to them, they didn't stick with me, is a thing that bothers me to this day. And if you watch their early music videos from this album, the slow-mo poses of their DJ hitting his turntables in their music videos drives me crazy to this day. It's an irrational thing.
That's the coolest.
No, it's absolutely not the coolest part.
They also look like Fight Club extras. So
they do. They really do.
All right, we got to go through a bit of the band's background here just to fill you in. I know the Linkin Park story's been well told, so I'm going to just kind of zoom through it here. Mike Shinoda, Rob Borden, and Brad Delson were three high school friends in an LA suburb. After high school, they started a band called Zero. That's Xero, the cool way to spell zero. They recorded and produced in Shinoda's bedroom studio, and this was back in 1996. They really got no traction. So the vocalist that they had paired up with at that point, Mark Wakefield, he left. They were auditioning singers, and Jeff Blue, who at that point was with Zoma Music, recommended Chester Bennington, who was formerly of Grey Days. So Bennington hooks up with them. They change the name from Zero to Hybrid Theory, and Shinoda and Bennington immediately, it's like, okay, that vocal trade-off is going to be, that's going to be kind of the staple of what we're doing here in blending genres. As Bennington told Kerrang, I noticed that Mike's rapping was really good, and I felt I could improve on their melodies as far as where their choruses were concerned. Something did tell me that, yeah, this is the one. This was the golden ticket to get inside Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. In 1999, via an online street team, they released the Hybrid Theory EP, which at that point was a self-titled EP. Obviously, they would eventually change the name. And that included this song, which you can get a feel for where they were at in terms of their sound evolution at this point. This song is And One, and it did appear on one of the special anniversary re-releases of Hybrid Theory. There have been like 50 different releases of Hybrid Theory over time. This is And One, one of their earliest tracks, and actually the first song they wrote as a band with Chester as a part of the writing process.
Where should I start? Disjointed heart. I've got no commitment to my own flesh and blood. Left all alone, far from my home. No one to hear me, to heal my ill heart. Keep it locked on inside. Keep my distance from you. Breaking apart in my heart to find release. Taking you out of my blood to bring me peace. Breaking apart in my heart to find release. Taking you out of my blood to bring me peace. Breaking apart in my heart to find release. Taking you out of my blood to bring me peace. Breaking apart in my heart to find release. Taking you out of my blood to bring me peace. Keep my distance. Keep my distance. Keep my distance.
So they released the self-titled EP. Not a lot of label interest, and it's not that the songs, obviously you go back and listen to And One, and it's a Linkin Park song. It doesn't sound too far cry from what would eventually make the Hybrid Theory album. None of the songs off the EP actually made that album. There was some up and down here. Dave Farrell left the band for about 18 months, and the band was begging him back because the chemistry felt off without him. But he was part of another band that was more successful at that point. So they released this EP and it's not getting traction. They do a bunch of showcase shows. Jeff Blue had invited a bunch of label reps to a rehearsal that they did, and they were universally passed on. The feeling was that the styles clashing was too different, and that they, Linkin Park in retrospect have said that they felt because they didn't fit the quote unquote frat rock vibe of bands similar to them at that time, that labels didn't really see it. Now, in a bit of good fortune, Jeff Blue then moved to Warner Brothers as a VP, and he signed them to a development deal in 1999. He also suggested they change their name. Linkin Park is a nod to the park of the same name, different spelling in Santa Monica, and not, unfortunately, Linkin Park in Cambridge, Ontario, where I played just a ton of baseball around the time that Linkin Park would have came out. It was extremely funny to me that Linkin Park was a park that I went to all the time. Jake, sorry to get a 519 talk in here, but had to shoehorn at least one reference.
I'm used to it.
Jake, by the way, sorry, I should have explained when Elamin was talking about growing up in Kingston that Kingston is on the other side of Toronto, also along the 401, but the opposite direction.
Kingston's actually the one town that I know where it is geographically because it's in between Toronto and Montreal.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
so
that's how a lot of people
passed
talk
it a
about
bunch
it.
of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, oh, the place you stop between Montreal and Toronto.
The train stops there. I know it.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Cambridge is. Cambridge is the en route when you're driving from Toronto to the US via like the Detroit way.
Yep.
That's where you stop to get coffee and lunch.
Big facts. There's a Wendy's there. I'm a fan.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great place to pull off the highway and then pull right back on the highway. So I was in Cambridge when Hybrid Theory was coming out. So let's dive in a little bit. So they get signed to this developmental deal to Warner Brothers, thanks in large part to Jeff Blue. The label, though, was listening and wasn't super impressed right away. And as the band told Alternative Nation in 2017, the label actually tried to get Chester to break off from the rest of the band and do something in a more traditional rock sound. This is Mike Shinoda relaying this story in 2017. He said, his loyalty was there from the very beginning. When we were recording Hybrid Theory, we were basically a new band with a new record deal. The label could have shelved us at any moment, and we were halfway through recording when our A&R started losing faith in us. He took Chester aside and suggested he take the band over, or put me on keyboards, or even kick me out. He told him, you're the talent, you should make a rock record, you don't need the rapping. Chester finished the conversation and came in to tell us, and I said, so what did you say to him? And Chester said, I told him to go fuck himself. So you can tell that there's a quick chemistry there. I have to say, Jake, there have been overtures of other people to, co-host this podcast to kick both of us off, I'm sure. And I have responded to them similarly, telling them to go fuck themselves. I hope you would do the same for me.
I usually respond, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so let's dive into the album. I mean, there's a lot to kind of discuss here. And obviously the music is unique and very good. And it's this cool kind of blending of like voice wise, it's Stone Temple Pilots. There's some Deftones in there, some of the Smiths, there's some new metal, there's some whatever Shinoda was doing at the time. But I think what stood out most to me and definitely stands out most going back and revisiting it is the lyrical content here from Chester. I'm going to play Crawling, which was the third single off the album, here as kind of an example. And coming out of that clip, we'll talk a lot about the writing process here and the lyrical side of Linkin Park that, 14, 15-year-old me maybe slept on, but grew to appreciate over time. This is the third single off Hybrid Theory, Crawling.
the surface, consuming, confusing. This lack of self-control I fear is never ending. Controlling, I can't seem to find myself again. My walls are closing in.
Not a sense of confidence. I'm convinced that there's just too much pressure to take.
I felt this way before. So insecure. Crawling in my skin. These wounds, they will not heal. Fear is how I fall. Confusing what is
Now, forgive me for going through the singles in backwards order here, but Elamin, what was your first introduction to Linkin Park? Or I guess not song wise, because I think everyone had the same kind of first introduction with One Step Closer, and then In the End as a 1-2 singles punch. But what were your impressions, and did you like them right away when you heard them, and kind of what stuck out about them for you?
Well, so my introduction to Linkin Park was, I guess, the same as everyone else, which is just that period of ubiquity of One Step Closer and In the End, which were those two singles were released, I think, a month apart in total, or it was just a really short period of time. And shout out to K-Rock 105.7, Kingston's best rock. They were bumping these songs really hard, and so as someone who's trying to learn English, but also just trying to listen to what Canadians are like. This is my sophisticated understanding of what the radio did at the time. It just was a constant, really catchy melodies, right? One Step Closer has catchy melodies. In the End has incredibly catchy melodies. And so they just get stuck in your head, and you're why am I still thinking about these songs? I used to love really wholesome Sudanese music that is about the fucking Nile or whatever, and now I am shouting "shut up" when I'm talking to you. And so I think it was just the incredible ability that they had around a melody, and also just I think I was scared of One Step Closer. I was scared of what Chester did with his voice, because I don't think I'd ever heard anything quite like that before. Even if you remember that period of time in nu metal, there weren't a lot of people who were doing that. There were before that and there were after that, but just in that small window of time in the year 2000, I would say not many people were screaming like that on the radio. And so that was my introduction, is being what is this? I'm scared of it, but also I love it.
Yeah, that's great. And, like Bennington said, the melodies is where he could kind of fit in, and that obviously pulls it all together and makes it a lot. I mean, it makes for better songs, but it also makes it more marketable, I'm sure. And it's usually the Bennington parts that kind of carry the more emotional weight, both because of his vocal style and because so for background, the writing process here was generally, at least for Hybrid Theory and Meteora, Mike and Brad would write the music, and then Mike and Chester would work on the lyrics together. Chester had by all accounts, a very painful childhood, in contrast to Mike's more standard suburban upbringing. As Shinoda told iHeartRadio, it was kind of a peanut butter and jelly situation. And the goal was, and this is again Shinoda, to have interpretations of universal feelings, emotions, and experiences, and as everyday emotions you talk about and think about. Bennington expanded a little bit on this to Rolling Stone in 2002. It's easy to fall into that thing, poor me. That's where songs like Crawling come from. I Can't Take Myself. But that song is about taking responsibility for your actions. I don't say you at any point. It's about how I'm the reason that I feel this way. There's something inside me that pulls me down. Now, Jake, we've talked a lot over the course of this podcast about how the tone in pop punk and emo kind of shifted over time to be, very, borderline misogynistic, or talking about, you did this to me, you hurt me, to be very inward facing, and that kind of started with Blink-182 in a jokey way, and acts like Dashboard Confessional. And I feel like Chester Bennington really pushed this exploration of how our traumas shape our actions, but how that's not an excuse. And he goes into that with respect to substance abuse, with respect to the sexual assault he experienced, the bullying he was a victim of. And I think that laying it all out there as these are things that I'm dealing with, and these are the traumas that have shaped who I am, but also maintaining that level of ownership over how you process that and how you put that back out into the world. And again, I don't think I was at all consciously processing this at age 14, 15, and probably a lot of other people weren't either. But that's such a core part of the Linkin Park experience in these early albums, and especially Chester's part. I'm wondering your thoughts on that, Jake, and if, when you went back to revisit this album this week, if you felt that and if it came through for you.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll say yes and no, and only no in the sense kind of like what Elamin said a few minutes ago, but how he can't really listen to this as an adult because it is such like a time and place record. I think for me, because I kind of perhaps unfairly kind of dismissed, because they got so big and they were so associated with sort of a type of music that I had kind of left behind, so to speak. I never really like took their emotionality, I guess, all that seriously. And I was just kind of like, okay, that's kind of a fun song. I like the song, whatever. I know, like, other than like, they were just kind of like the In the End band to me for a long time. And then when Chester passed, all of the tributes and writings about him really kind of took me as a shock. Like, I didn't know that people looked to this band that way. And it was kind of surprising to me because they're just not a band I associated with I was kind of put them in the box with like your Korns, I guess, which not that Korn doesn't also talk about serious issues and have very deep connections with people, but they're a band that I never really looked at in that way. And I felt the same with Linkin Park. But then when Chester died, I was kind of like, oh, wow, people whose music tastes are very similar to mine look to this band and this guy this way. And it made me sort of not fully reevaluate. Like, the music still doesn't really grab me, but I also think that's because I can't listen to it as an adult because it's like Hybrid Theory Linkin Park. And so it's like very much a thing, like a specific thing. But I did find it interesting how deeply people feel connected to Chester's lyrics and his vocals. And then going back to it now with maybe more of a more objective viewpoint, I definitely get it more than I think I ever gave it credit for beforehand.
Elamin, where do you fall on that? I mean, obviously you talked about how the emotion in the songs kind of gripped you, but was there an understanding of kind of the lyrical content, or was that more of a kind of post facto reflection for you, realizing that, hey, Chester and Linkin Park were kind of opening up these topics?
Well, it was kind of like conversations that enabled, like the people I knew who were listening to Linkin Park were much more comfortable talking about their emotion and their damage than other people. And I think it took me a long time to realize how powerful that was, because I just thought like, oh, everybody does this. And it's like not true at all. And you kind of get to realize that a little bit later in life in a sense. And so what was powerful about their legacy, and I agree with you that like the force of it hit me all over again after Chester's death, but like it was really the way that Linkin Park created a space for people to feel and have those emotions. And like one of the people that I talked to for that piece was Mike Shinoda, and he actually talked about how like One Step Closer was the song that the radio played, but then everybody came to the concert and they had this massive catharsis moment because so many of the other songs are much more deeply emotional, and they allow themselves to like get hurt and get angry and get bitter and process those emotions together in the music. And so it ended up like converting a lot of the fans who didn't know what to expect because they just thought that they were the shut up when I'm talking to you band, but then they would show up and like have this like deeply emotional experience and be like, what the fuck is happening? Why am I feeling all these things? And you know what? Like, I hear you when you say that you thought that they were the kind of like the in the end band, in the sense that like sometimes a band gets so big that you're like, like they're just like this. They're the band that does that one song, and that
Right.
works against. It still works against them, like even now. But they got deep cuts, man. They got like they're not even like bangers. They're just like, this song is like really emotional, and like the only reason it's here is to just process this emotion.
And I think that's a good point too, because I feel like because they became like the in the end or like the numb encore guys, I feel like I don't know, and as bigger fans of the band, perhaps you guys disagree, but I feel like the songs of theirs that got like ridiculously huge are not like their good songs. I don't mean that as like good, but like in the end doesn't move the needle for me a lot.
It starts with one thing. I don't know why. It doesn't even matter how hard you tried. Keep that in mind. I designed this rhyme to explain in due time. All I know, time is a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as the pendulum swings. Watch it count down to the end of the day. The clock takes life away. It's so unreal. Didn't look out below. Watch the time go right out the window. Trying to hold on, didn't even know I wasted it all just to watch you go. I kept everything inside, and even though I tried, it all fell apart. What it meant to me will eventually be a memory of a time I tried so hard and got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to fall to lose it all. But in the end, it doesn't even matter.
Jake, to your point about the main songs maybe not hitting you as well, it was interesting to go back and read some of the retrospectives on this, and like, Ian Cohen said that other than the singles, the album's like the rest of the songs are pretty forgettable, and I don't feel that way at all. Like I think Runaway and A Place for My Head and Cure for the Itch, like those are all songs that fit really well and create like a pretty complete emotional experience over the course of the album. With respect to In the End, yeah, it probably did put expectations or the way they were framed kind of out of their control. It was obviously a very, very major success. It was their second single and their highest charting. And, there is still, I don't think that's a bad song, Jake. I think the piano's nice. I think it's one of the best examples of that contrast between Shinoda and Bennington. The band had also in the writing process really pushed experimenting with Chester's voice and what his identity as a singer would be, because I guess he was, to hear Shinoda tell it, he would like fall into that habit that all of us do when we sing songs of bands we like, and he would try to sing like other singers subconsciously. And I feel like, them finding what Chester's voice is was an important part of that process for them. But the success of In the End, to Elamin's earlier point and to his entire essay at BuzzFeed News, is that the enormity of that song did open up those things. And Bennington told MTV around that time, I can't talk about this crappy thing that happened to me and expect him, being Shinoda, to be able to sing it. It has to be vague enough for both of us to go, we can relate to it. And we found that by writing in that way, our lyrics were hitting home with a lot of different people and a lot of different age groups. And that's something that Gilmour helped them work through. And Elamin, I know you wanted to talk about Gilmour's involvement with this album a little bit. So I think that's maybe a natural time to give your Gilmour feelings, because it does sound like, he had a good hand in kind of massaging all these disparate parts into what was the finished product.
But the best part is that, like, they didn't really like him. Like, that's, You know, like so Mike Shinoda's given this interview where he actually like told people that the part where Chester's shouting "Shut up when I'm talking to you," perhaps the part that Linkin Park is most well known for, is not only about Don Gilmore but directly to the face of Don Gilmore as he's sitting there recording the song, because like Don Gilmore was like big for producing a lot of like big rock bands, like he did like Eve 6, he did like Lit. He's the guy that a label calls when they're like, we want a good rock hit on the radio and we want it to sound awesome. And so he shows up, he's got this unbelievable talent in Chester, and he's like, I don't really know what to do with this hip hop thing. You guys have like a weird additional part, but whatever. And like from the way that Shinoda describes it, he actually sounds like he was quite dismissive of how to like fully incorporate that into the record. And so they had like a really, tough and tenuous relationship with him when they were working with him. Now, they obviously the record sold big. It's a top selling record of this millennium. Like presumably that's why they brought him back for Meteor. They're like, fuck, he's bad, but whatever, he's also good. But it's so interesting to me that like he's the inspiration behind such rage, and it's because he wanted to put them in this box because he's like, I know what I can make you. I know the thing that the radio wants to hear, and in fact the radio did want to hear that, but they were trying to like push back and try to create something more. And like by the time that they were done working with him on Meteora, they were like, yeah, like this is done. We're going to self-produce the rest of our album. So they did. But it was always fascinating to me that he's like the object of the rage in One Step Closer.
Yeah, and to hear the band tell it too, it was like he got so dismissive at points that like Chester would give him new lyrics and he'd reject them without really even reading them and just be like, go back and do it again. And like, I guess that one of the maybe why they were able to skew young was that they didn't swear in their songs early on. Like shut up is the big bad word. And to hear them tell it, it's because Gilmore was pushing them to, express themselves better, which is a nice place to come from. I wonder if Gilmore was trying to make sure that all the songs were radio friendly. But as Shinoda told Rolling Stone, it was scary in the beginning when we started writing about what we felt. But once we realized we weren't the only ones who felt that way, once we saw the audience was coming along with us on that, it freed us up. We wanted to be a little more descriptive instead of just going fuck all the time. We wanted to go into detail. So the biggest curse word on the album is shut up when I'm talking to you. Shut up, off of One Step Closer.
I cannot take this anymore. Saying everything I said before. All these words, they make no sense. I find bliss in ignorance. Less I hear, the less you say. You'll find that out anyway. Just like before. Everything you say to me is one step closer to the edge, and I'm about to break. I need a little room to breathe, 'cause I'm one step closer to the edge. I'm about to break. Everything you say to me is one step closer to the edge, and I'm about to break. I need a little room to breathe, 'cause I'm one step closer to the edge, and I'm about to break.
So not only did they write that song amid kind of label and producer pressure as they were having trouble finishing Runaway as well, and that frustration comes through, they also didn't like the way it turned out, and Chester didn't want it on the album anyway at all, but it became the first single and was what allegedly hooked programmers in at a radio convention, which according to Blue got them to kind of rush the recording and the release because there was this buzz building. So those were kind of the singles. Paper Cut, which we played off the top, was also a fourth single. After our next break, we're going to talk a lot more about the legacy and the impact of this kind of space for vulnerability. But Elamin, before we do that, I'm just wondering, the non-singles on the album, do any stand out to you as favorites? Did any really hit home for you?
Oh my God, where do I even start? I mean, okay.
Go through all of them, man. All we got is time. Producer Dylan can cut this down after. All we got is time.
I was also always surprised that Runaway wasn't a big single, because Runaway is like this like really beautiful song that is like it's like really good at angst, and I think it's actually genuinely, honestly hard to be good at angst because it is this emotion that people can't control very well and can't articulate very well. I think A Place for My Head is a kind of a strange song. Like if you go back and listen to the way that Shinoda takes that beat, it's like a weirdly syncopated kind of rapping. Like you don't really expect someone to flow on that kind of music that way. So it's just always interesting to me. If you ever get the deluxe edition, which I highly recommend that you do, there's My December, which is like a really soft sort of piano song, entirely written by Mike Shinoda. I don't know why it got relegated to the bonus version of the album, because it's like, to me, it's just a beautiful adult contemporary radio song that should have been played. And it's just Chester singing on that song, but it's like completely perfect. There's just so many. I mean, like, listen, this album is 12 songs long, and you can so easily imagine 8, possibly 9 singles from it. The fact that they only managed to keep it to like, I think it was 4, is already an impressive feat to me.
All right, we're going to talk about how this album was received, how those singles pushed Hybrid Theory to be one of the best-selling albums. I mean, not one of the, as Elamin said, the best-selling album of this millennium. And we're going to talk about their legacy, specifically with respect to creating that space to feel after this. So Hybrid Theory was a massive success. In retrospect, it's it's gotten a lot of accolades. Loudwire called it the number 10 best hard rock debut. Rock Sound called it the number 1 modern classic of the last 15 years. It was Kerrang's number 8 rock album of the 2000s. Won a bunch of awards and was nominated for a bunch of others. There was initial success too. It debuted at number 16 on Billboard. It sold 4.1 million copies in the US out of the gate to make it the top selling album of that year. And it eventually hit diamond status, 11 times platinum. Per download, it is the best-selling album of the 21st century and the highest-selling debut album since Guns N' Roses. Despite all of that, it was clear that some places didn't quite get it yet. You know, it got called mediocre or derivative. It got lumped in with a lot of other nu metal bands, or frat rock, as Shinoda called it. You know, there were some places that appreciated it. Pop Matters called them a far more complex and talented group that will continue to fascinate and challenge music standards. It was up and down. And I think that makes sense for how it was received in the time, just because of everything else that was going on in the kind of genres around them. Elamin, part of your essay kind of touched on how they were received at the time. Do you have much reflection on that in terms of like why maybe it didn't hit as critically as it did, as it resonated with like literally millions of people?
Well, I mean, like, I think part of that is you got to remember that it was landing in the middle of this nu metal moment that was kind of at that point overstaying its welcome. You know, like you'd already had Papa Roach, you'd already had Limp Bizkit, you'd already had, Seven Dust, you'd already had Korn, and they've been at it for a while. Like this album came out, I think, a week after Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog Flavored Water. Which, first of all, woof, what a big week for music. But I remember one critic, I can't remember which critic it was, but one critic called it slam dancing in a high chair music. Like he was like, "Oh, this is wow. Music for babies to cry to," essentially. And it's because that's what the rest of the nu metal scene was seen as. And it was hard, at least like visually, to distinguish them from the rest of the nu metal scene. Like that weird lighting that they had for the One Step Closer video. Like obviously they wanted their aesthetic and their vibe to be like, oh, like we're with those people. And they toured with those people and they got grouped with those people. So it's easy to imagine why the critics who maybe listened to a couple songs were like, no, this is not serious or good music. And maybe that is the case, but like it is emotional music, and I think that elevates it to a different realm of discussion.
Yeah, that all adds up to me. Yeah, I think the best thing that we can say about it is that it got a major seal of approval that we'll talk about in just a second. Obviously, this was a massive success. They get the whole touring buffet, Ozfest, Family Values, their own headline tour. They played 324 shows in 2001, as they told Rolling Stone, which seems impossible, but apparently they did it.
That's wild.
Yeah, they also got the heavy soundtrack treatment. They released that remix album, Reanimation, with Pharrell back in the mix. That also did really well. And then Meteora came out in 2004, which is, really, to me, it is an extension of Hybrid Theory. Those albums pair really well. To me, Jake, I know when we were prepping for this episode, you brought up Faint, which is actually off of Meteora. And I think because those two albums sounded similar and were similarly popular, and then also were both on the Collision Course matchup with Jay-Z, it can be one of those things where like, oh yeah, which one of those albums is this song from? But yes, the big seal of approval is, of course, that they got to do a collaboration, a mashup with Jay-Z. Jake, you mentioned Numb Encore earlier on, and I apologize. I know you like Faint a lot, but we're going to play the Numb Encore clip because it is, by a large margin, the best song off that Collision Course mashup.
Yeah. Thank you. You're far too kind. Yeah. Ready? Let's go. Can I get an encore? Do you want more? Cook and roll with the Brooklyn boys. So for one last time, I need y'all to roll. Yeah. Now what the hell are you waiting for? After me, there should be no more. So for one last time, nigga, make some noise. Get him, Jay. Who you know fresher than Ho? Riddle me that. The rest of y'all know where I'm lyrically at. Can none of y'all mirror me back? Yeah, hear me rap, it's like Han G rapping his prime. I'm young H.O., raps Grateful Dead. Back to take over the globe, now break bread. I'm in Boeing Jets, Global Express. Out the country, but the blueberries still connect. On the low, but the yacht got a triple deck. But when you young, what the fuck you expect? Yep. Grand opening, grand closing. Goddamn your manhole, crack the can open again. Who you gonna find open in him with no pen? Just draw inspiration. Who you gonna see you can't replace him? We need you to remember one thing. I came, I saw, I conquered. From record sales, sold out concerts. So motherfucker, if you want this encore, I need you to scream till your lungs are sore. Come on.
I'm tired of being what you want me to be. Feeling so faithless, lost under the surface. Don't know what you're expecting of me, but under the pressure of walking in your shoes, every step that I take is another mistake to you. And every second I waste is more than I can take. I've become so numb.
Can I get an encore? Do you want more?
I've become so numb.
So for one last time, I need y'all to roll. One last time, I need y'all to roll.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, did you have time for the Collision Course? Was that your stuff?
Absolutely, 100%. But I gotta tell you, my favorite part of Numb Encore is when Mike Shinoda very seriously says, "Get him, Jay," as though, like, it is the permission of Michael fucking Shinoda that is going to unleash Jay-Z upon the mass. Like, yeah, I was like, Jay-Z is holding back, but no. Mike Shinoda says, "Get him, Jay," and off he goes. I honestly, first of all, let us just talk about how there were just a bunch of good mashup records at the time, and this came out and like absolutely just destroyed them. The rest of them, like, do you guys remember the Grey album? Like when like Danger Mouse did that?
Yeah.
Jay-Z, like the Jay and the Beatles one. And then you get Numb Encore. I'm like, what a time. I don't know. You did say that Numb Encore is the best one, but I gotta tell you, like, Points of Authority, 99 Problems, One Step Closer is a bop. I do go back to that one pretty often.
Yeah, that's true. I tried to avoid 99 Problems because I really don't need that song stuck in my head. And that will get wedged in there for weeks at a time. The other option here was, of course, to play a Fort Minor clip because, I do remember the name.
Yes.
That's where Shinoda went afterward. So to round out of this, Linkin Park did have 7 albums in total. It ended with One More Light in May of 2017. This is where we pivot to a more somber side. On July 20th, 2017, Chester Bennington died in what was ruled a suicide by hanging. As Jake kind of discussed earlier on, there was just a remarkable amount of tributes and outpouring and guest performances at their first show back. And they set up the One More Light Fund in his honor. And just about everyone in the industry and every fan wanted to contribute to it in some way. The band is still on hiatus to this day. Shinoda has said that they're open to it, but they're not really sure what form it'd take. And they still love performing live and in the studio and stuff. But what do you do with it? Do you replace Bennington? Do you create a new band with the same remaining members? Is a question there. And I think that Bennington passing away in 2017 offered, and Hybrid Theory turning 20 in 2020, there's kind of been a renewed look back at Linkin Park and what they meant. And former guest Hanif Abdurraqib had an essay at the time of Chester's death about how he was a mirror for the pain of others. And Elamin, I know that you linked to that in your essay on the 20th anniversary of Hybrid Theory, and you called it Music to Weep and Scream and Fall Apart to Without Reservation. And I just want to open it up now. I mean, I don't want to just read your essay back to you, but your conversation with Shinoda and your own reflection on this album and Linkin Park as a whole, what do you think the legacy is here for them? Obviously they stand out as, they were a very early 2000s band doing something that was very of that time. But also I feel like, and the impression I get from your essay is that there is a longer lasting and maybe more important legacy that Linkin Park had a big hand in around that time.
When I return to this album, like I said earlier, first of all, I am very much encased in those emotions. But I'm also, I guess, encased in the gratitude for having those emotions, because I think it's very healthy to know your rage and know your rage well and have language for it. You know what I mean? Like, have language for the things that are bothering you, the things that you are trying to process, the darkness that you sometimes have to live in, even in that period of time when you're like, I don't really know much about the world. I just know that these feelings are really intense. And I guess like the way that Chester managed to share his demons with people and really put you in it, like that was something that was not available to me widely at the time. So that, I get very irritated when people kind of criticize Linkin Park for being sort of a commercial product, because of course they are. But what was revolutionary about them is that they made all those emotions themselves a commercial product. And I think that is actually a really hard thing to do, to invite people to your darkness, right? And be able to sit in it and actually like manage to sell records out of that because you managed to make it so compelling. Like, and you mentioned Meteora, but like a song like Somewhere I Belong is, to me, like lyrically, it's just so precise, A song like Numb is also so precise in terms of describing all those emotions. And there weren't other genres where I saw men feeling things. There weren't even that many men feeling things in rock music at the time. But Linkin Park were very comfortable being that band. And I guess like that is its greatest legacy, is that it created the space where it was wildly popular and commercially successful to be as vulnerable as possible. And like, that is just not a thing that I'm seeing right now. And it's genuinely like a thing that I miss about them. I think it's a thing that I miss about the space that they created. Yeah,
for sure. And I agree with that a lot. And, when Chester died, I remember being like more shaken up than I would have expected had you told me ahead of time. And I don't think I had really sat with as much of the influence as they had. And, I've talked a lot about on this podcast about how, over the course of, let's say 2000 to 2005 was kind of where I found my way, and like, okay, I could be emotional and vulnerable and stuff like that. And, you don't think of, because you were 14 at the time or whatever, that they had that influence, and they really did. And it was it was a wild day to be on Twitter and see the amount of people that felt similarly. Jake, I just want to revisit your earlier comment about your surprise level when, you did see that outpouring. I'm just wondering if you have more thoughts on it, having gone through this episode and reading Elamin's piece and reflecting back to when Chester passed away. Like, does this kind of reshape the way you think of Linkin Park?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I don't think this album is ever going to be for me, but I also think that's fine, obviously. But I do think that something that I don't think I necessarily gave them, I think a thing that I sort of in my younger days held against them is actually what makes them so kind of impressive and important, in the sense that, like, just to pick on In the End again, because it's the biggest one, like that song is very simple, and like lyrically it's a simple piano line, and like the chorus, I tried so hard I got so far, and the end didn't really matter, is like not a, like, it's never going to be up there in like the great stanzas of music, but I think that's what makes them so important. And sort of what Elamin was saying, like the accessibility of that chorus being so simple is, like pop music is generally not as complex as the music, which is not a bad thing. And I think specifically when you're a rock band whose audience is probably people who don't think about these kind of emotions a lot, and you can deliver that package in such a simple way that's accessible and that isn't talking down to anybody. And as you guys were saying earlier, it was very first person, so it's not, ascribing any of it to anyone else. I think that's a important thing especially in sort of frat rock music, to use the disparaging term, which I don't even really think is necessarily what Linkin Park is. But I do think that while they might not ever be my thing, I do think that, especially in light of Chester's death and everything we've talked about since then, what we talked about today, I think there's a bigger place for them in rock music than I would have thought there was even just like 4 years ago.
I think you're describing it exactly right. Like you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is that, like, they are kind of democratic, in the sense of like democratizing those feelings, or at least like they approach the way that they make those feelings in a way that is really democratic and makes it feel like it's for everyone. And like, one thing that's interesting about this record is that it's sold 12 million copies since it's come out in the last 20 years, but 3 million of those have been in the last 3 years. And I think that is fascinating. Like 3 years since Chester's death, which tells me that, like, there is something about the period of time when you're going through certain emotions where you will keep referring back to maybe like archetypal and sort of storied pillars of like, oh, this is how you process adolescence. And I kind of feel like maybe this album, not all of Linkin Park's work, but maybe this album's kind of become like a fundamental part of that tapestry in the last few years or so. Like, I start that piece that I wrote with Lil Peep, who's a rapper who's since passed away. He overdosed a couple of years ago. But the day, or like a week after Chester's death, he was performing In the End in a weird LA club with a bunch of teens. He was himself, I think he was 17 or 18 when he died. And like every single one of them knew the words. And even though they would have been like 2 when the song came out. And I think there's something about like, there's a staying power that's like, okay, you're going through your Linkin Park phase in life. It's kind of like you read Shakespeare when you're 14, you listen to Linkin Park when you're 13. And I wonder if that's going to be just like a thing that persists for a while. Like that's just like a place that you go when you need it.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, to your point, it hit number 1 on iTunes and Amazon, and it went back to 27 on Billboard, which is, there's obviously something about it there that's resonating over a long period of time, over 2 decades now. Jeez. Yeah. Okay, so we're at the part of the podcast where we got to kind of start to wrap up. So I guess just quickly, normally we'd, banter a little bit about rankings of the songs on the album, but we're running a bit long here. And also I think we covered a lot of that as we went through. So Jake, I guess I'll kick it to you first, since you have this aversion to In the End. I'm wondering what your favorite tracks on the album are. I know Faint is your favorite Linkin Park track, but that is not on this album.
For the record, I knew that Faint wasn't on this record. I just wanted to talk about it because, like, even though I don't really like Linkin Park, I genuinely think that Faint is one of the best rock songs of like the millennium. Like it's so good.
I can't wait.
We can talk about that
right after this conversation. I love it.
It's so good. I think Points to Authority is probably my favorite song on this album, which I know we didn't talk about, but it's the one that gets stuck in my brain the most. I also really like A Place for My Head. And even though it's like not really my thing explicitly, I think Crawling is for exactly all the reasons we've talked about today. I think Crawling is a very important song. So I would put that number 3.
What about you, Elamin? Do you have a top 3, or are you able to narrow it down like that, or not really?
Well, I definitely have a top 1. And a top 1 I think is Paper Cut. Paper Cut is a perfect distillation of what Linkin Park do, just like as a band. Like, it is the rap and the metal in perfect harmony. I asked Shinoda about this in that conversation. I was like, did you guys mean to put Paper Cut as the first song? And he was like, we listened to all of our songs and we were like, yep, Paper Cut, we have no doubt it's going to be the very first one, because it really does do that. Like, it distills the project of what Linkin Park is about. So Paper Cut is like the one for me. And then I guess I was like, maybe 2 and 3, I would do I would say Crawling at number 2, and somewhere between Runaway and A Place for My Head for number 3.
Yeah, I think that's a good ranking. I'd have Paper Cut a little lower, but I think those are my top 4, probably in some order. So, Elamin, what we do at the end of each episode is we pick a song from the episode to go on our mixtape that best represents the conversation we had, or just the guest's favorite. Are you down for Paper Cut to be the representation from this episode, or do you have a different choice for our mixtape?
I would say, well, that's an interesting question, because I'm like, what is the job of this mixtape? Is it to introduce people to songs they may not have heard, or is it to be a perfect representation of the conversation? It
can go a lot of different ways, and we have not been consistent with it. Sometimes we go with the big single because it insists upon itself. Sometimes we go with, you don't need to play the single because everyone will have heard it, so here's something else. Sometimes it's, the song we went deepest on during the conversation. We can go a lot of different ways. So this is the nice thing when we have guests, is Jake and I don't have to choose as much. We can just put it on your lap.
Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. You know what? I think let's go with Paper Cut, just because it is not as well known a single as the rest of them. It has always like kind of confused me why it was the last single. Like, it was released as a single almost a year after the album came out, and it just didn't get as much play as it should have. It also came out like 3 weeks after 9/11, so maybe that was also part of the reasons why it might have not. But if you haven't heard Paper Cut, I would say Paper Cut is the one to go to.
All right, that's great. And we met our quota for one 9/11 reference per month on the podcast. It always manages to come up when you're talking about music in the 2000 to 2010 range, as we do so often on here. All right, Paper Cut is heading to the mixtape. At this point in the podcast, we want to, of course, especially because we're running long, we want to thank producer Dylan for all his great work putting these episodes together. And you can go to @Elamin88 to support Elamin and check out all his great work at CBC, at BuzzFeed News, and especially with the Pop Chat podcast over at CBC. So please go. I'm sure you guys, if you're listening to this, follow Elamin anyway, but go check it out and check that podcast out. Elamin, thanks so much for coming on, man. We really. Oh yeah. Also, make sure to check out that essay that we keep referencing, and we can drop a link to. I was over at BuzzFeed News in October 2020. Elamin, thanks so much, man.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Please try the fish.
This is fun.